Little by little, they were approaching Never Never Land, and after many hours, they finally reached it, because the island itself was looking for them. That's the only way of reaching its enchanted shores. "There it is," said Peter in a calm voice. Where? There, where all those arrows are headed." Indeed, 1,000,000 golden arrows were pointing the children towards the island, all fired off by their friend, the sun, who was concerned lest they get lost before he left them for the night.
It's not necessary to go to Never Never Land to sense the excitement Peter Pan felt upon seeing an island appear on the horizon. Europe has several archipelagos whose shores are protected by the ocean, and which offer the promise of finding nature close to its original state.
In the eastern Mediterranean, the Cyclades archipelago is a group of 56 islands of all sizes, on which a magnificent civilization developed 3,000 years before Christ. Cyclades probably comes from the word kyklos, which means circle in Greek. The ancients had observed that these islands form a kind of circle around the sanctuary of Delos.
These bits of dry land scattered in the Aegean Sea are generally rugged and often mountainous, a landscape that at first doesn't seem to favor agriculture, yet the inhabitants of the Cyclades dedicate a large portion of their time to farming.
For centuries, the islands have been producing grains and grapes. We are far from the demands of the market, far away from the continent, and it seems as if nothing here need ever change. The Romans, Arabs, Venetians, and Turks passed through these islands and left traces that give each of them its particular charm. The Cyclades are dotted with little churches, whose brightly colored cupolas are inseparable from the sea in the countryside. Most of these chapels were built after the 17th century.
Houses on the islands are characteristic, with simple shapes and soft, rounded lines. Homes here are painted and repainted endlessly to accentuate the contrasts, no doubt to make the sea appear all the more blue, the light all the more brilliant.
It's hard to choose among the islands. Paros, with 118 kilometers of coastline, is one of the largest and also one of the most frequently visited. It's 95 nautical miles from the port of Piraeus. The capital, Parikia, the island's main port, is located on the site of the ancient town.
Parikia is typical of the villages in the Cyclades, with its two-story houses, flagstones, vaulted streets, and here and there little bits of nature that fit in so well with these peaceable surroundings. Although the south of the island is rugged, Parikia's natural bay opens onto beautiful stretches of flat countryside. Leaving the town and heading north, one crosses great fertile plains.
On the northern tip of the island, at Kolombithres, the beach is surrounded by famous landscapes. These rocks inevitably invoke sculptures. But this natural oddity is probably unrelated to the island's former pride. In the 5th century BC, the marble from Paros was used to build most of the temples in Greece. In the same era, a greatly renowned school of sculpture was opened on the island and attracted the greatest artists of ancient Greece.
In the most mountainous region, in the center of the island, lies the little town of Lefkes. Its streets are so narrow that even the local garbage service relies on donkeys. In Lefkes, it seems as if time has stopped, or at least slowed down. It's a small island within an island. Even inland, the colors of the shutters remind one that the sea is omnipresent.
At the extreme northern tip of Paros is the small town of Naoussa, with its traditional port exclusively reserved for fishing. In the Cyclades, the history of fishing goes back thousands of years. It is still plied with boats and tools that allow the sea to renew its resources.
On just about every island in the Cyclades is a port where one can watch the same motions, the same sun-worn features, where one can sense thousands of eternal stories, stories of entire lives shared with the sea.
Everything that the Aegean Sea has to offer eventually ends up in the stalls of the port of Mykonos. Mykonos, between Tinos and Naxos, is one of the most beautiful islands in the Cyclades.
Ένα τάγερο. Και 5-10.
In the Alefkandra district, the balconied houses are built directly over the sea, which explains why it's commonly called the Little Venice. Originally, these picturesque buildings were designed to allow the sailors to board their boats directly.
The church of Panagia Paraportiani is the largest of the 400 churches and chapels of the islands. Its architecture is a blend of popular Byzantine and Western elements, giving it a typical Cyclades character. These mills, with their thatched roofs, have become the symbol of Mykonos almost all over the world.
The island has earned well-deserved international fame, unfortunately at the price of its tranquility. Writer Michel Deyon, while relating the developments of the little Greek island of Spetsai, describes the fate of these islands, which are too beautiful to remain hidden.
We lived there to find peace, calm, the splendor of the days, and a certain solitude. However, it was impossible to ignore the metamorphosis of the island. It discovered prosperity and didn't always accommodate to it well. Aside from certain unavoidable moments of irritation, it is wisest to ignore it. After all, the island will always keep its secrets, secrets we alone are privy to.
The least secret and the least discreet of the island's guests is this rather tame pelican. One of these animals alighted one day on Mykonos. The inhabitants fed and pampered it so well it stayed several years. Other pelicans followed, spoiled in turn by the tourists, who've made it the island's unexpected mascot.
On Mykonos, as well as on all the Cyclades, blows a northeastern wind known as the Meltem. In summer, under the most ferocious sun, it keeps the climate on the island temperate. As soon as we leave the busier islands, the Cyclades offer pristine natural landscapes, isolated villages, empty beaches, and deserted coastal inlets.
Geologists consider this archipelago the remnant of a continent that existed long ago between Greece and Turkey. A series of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions gave the islands the appearance they have today.
Life in the Cyclades is fragrant and sweet. Cradled by the ocean and sea breeze, one simply lets the sun shine down. The forces of nature have never seemed so mild. Men are so fully in harmony with the elements here that they sometimes carve their homes into the very stone.
These spectacular cliffs line one of the world's most surprising coastlines, one of the most unique in the Cyclades Islands, or at least what remains of it, because the island of Santorini literally exploded during a volcanic eruption 3,500 years ago. The middle of the island caved in. All that remains is the steep, shattered outer ring. Today, the island offers some extraordinary vantage points.
Life took hold again, high on these cliffs, where the small towns of Fira and Io were rebuilt, with houses hanging over the abyss. It's 300 meters to the surface of the water, and another 300 meters to the bottom of this caldera, where a new volcano arose just 3 centuries ago. As sheer as the rock face of this side of the island is, the surroundings are gently rolling, and the landscape has a peaceful appearance, like that of the other Cyclades.
But in Santorini, surprises are always close at hand. These houses are carved into the 10-meter-thick layer of pumice stone that blanketed the island during the cataclysm. In Santorini, everything is white or brown, made of pumice or lava.
With its unusual profile, the volcano of Santorini looks like some sort of accident in the sleepy Cyclades. Here the Mediterranean's calm waters usually bathe peaceful lands. Yet, there is a Mediterranean archipelago that is almost entirely volcanic, and where there continues to be a great deal of underground activity. Leaving Greece, we reach these islands after a sea journey to the west that lasts several days. The Lipari Islands are located a few dozen kilometers from the coast of Sicily.
Lipari is the largest of the 7 islands which compose this archipelago. It's difficult to imagine that such attractive shores were once the setting for violent volcanic eruptions. Lipari has been inhabited since early antiquity. Archaeological digs have brought to light homes built in the 17th century BC. Other more recent structures date back only to the Roman era. From Lipari, one can see the island of Salina, less than 4 kilometers away, whose extinct volcano is the highest in the archipelago. All island dwellers claim that their island is the most beautiful, but no one argues Volcano's claim to being one of the most strange. The island of Volcano is separated from Lipari by only a few hundred meters. Here one can observe fuming vents and seething underwater volcanic activity. The volcano last erupted in 1888. At the extreme northern tip of the archipelago, the island of Stromboli is somewhat like an entire volcano simply stuck into the sea. In yesteryear, the inhabitants tried to predict the weather by watching the smoke plume from the crater. The volcano is constantly active, even if only moderately.
Shaking, they press themselves to the enclosure's walls with an indignant roar that echoes through the mountain. This is how Virgil describes the winds imprisoned by King Aeol on this archipelago. From this myth, the islands have gotten another name, the Aeolian Islands.
In an unusual archipelago, located between the English Channel and the Atlantic Ocean, this island seems suspended between heaven and earth. Nature has favored the Channel Islands, endowing them with an amazing climatic alchemy that blends harsh rainy weather with the mild temperatures of southern climates. Although they're just off the French coast, these islands are English at heart and form an archipelago with exceptional charm.
The Channel Islands are mostly made up of granite several hundreds of millions of years old. These sharp reefs have acted over time as veritable natural ramparts, protecting the islands from many would-be conquerors. Sheltered behind the high cliffs that form most of its coastline, the island of Jersey has been able to develop in complete tranquility.
The island's first inhabitants came here from the continent 10,000 years ago. At that time, the level of the sea was lower than it is today, and they reached Jersey by foot across dry land. Over the centuries, they discovered that the stone had such qualities as to ensure that their monuments would be eternal. Later, granite was used to protect the island from its ambitious French neighbors. And in the 18th century, round towers modeled after those found on Corsica were erected all the way around the island's coastline.
Today, everything about the island's architecture bears the mark of these islanders' attachment to this material. Clay, obviously more malleable than granite, has long been worked by Jersey craftsmen, and they've made pottery a local specialty. To dream up the refreshing motifs used on their varied creations, these artists need only stroll around the island for inspiration from nature. Flowers are everywhere. Homes, gardens, roads, light posts, everything is ornamented with multicolored bouquets. For those who live on Jersey, caring for flowers is an everyday habit.
Here, banked and clumped flowers border traditional English greens and Mediterranean species imported to the island. The Gulf Stream makes the climate particularly mild, and its clemency enables plants one is accustomed to seeing in more southerly climes to flourish here.
The cultivation of flowers has become a specialty of the Channel Islands, which export the production to English markets. Because of the winds, which can sometimes be quite devastating, flowers are grown in greenhouses. One sees them everywhere. 1/15 of the surface of Guernsey is covered with them. In addition to forced cultivation, individuals often have private greenhouses in their gardens. They grow flowers and vegetables for their own consumption, and sell the surplus along the roadside in front of their homes.
One cannot speak of the island's specialties without mentioning knitting. The Guernsey sweater in heavy navy blue round knit wool was once the typical fisherman's sweater. In the markets today, they're more frequently sold to tourists. Tourism is the island's second largest economic activity, and the stores in St. Peter Port, the island's largest city, profit from its low tax rates.
Visitors staying on the island might want to try the golf course at Ancres. The course still bears the traces of an anti-tank barrier from the Second World War, but the major obstacles to be crossed before teeing off are more natural ones.
The first boat leaving Guernsey in the morning is called the milk boat, off to fetch the milk from the little island of Herm, taking with it early rising tourists, who at this hour get a reduction on the price of the crossing. The total population of the island of Herm is 37. There's just about only one business here, milk production at the island's single dairy farm. The utter calm of Herm, where cars and radios are forbidden, seems to please the herd. Daily production here totals 900 litres. Herm, 2.5 kilometres in length, covers an area of 180 hectares at high tide, and twice that, 360 hectares, at low tide.
In the highlands of Sark, an estate called the Seigneurie dominates the island. It was completed in the 19th century with the construction of a tower that makes it possible to communicate with Guernsey 13 kilometers away using visual signals. The seigneur, the lord of the island, lives here. Indeed, we are looking at the last feudal civilization in Europe. The island is divided among 40 landholders, who each have the right to own one tractor. These are the only motor vehicles allowed on the island. The speed limit is 8 kilometers per hour. To get around the island, one has the choice of a horse-drawn carriage or a bicycle. Far from the bustle of the port cities and the noise of automobile traffic, Sark is a calm, lush land where one rediscovers what peace is.
In fact, one should say the Sark Islands, because the island is cut in two, linked only by an impressive isthmus 100 meters above sea level. Victor Hugo, when in exile in Guernsey, described it as a kind of fairy castle full of marvels.
Much further north, the archipelago of the Lofoten is located within the Arctic Circle. It has the appearance of an amazing chain of mountains jutting out of the sea. As one looks around these islands, it is impossible to see the transition between the jagged peaks, some of which are over 1,000 meters high, and the branches of the sea which wrap themselves around the mountains. Stretching over 120 kilometers on a north-south axis, The archipelago rises up like a sea wall, behind which the Norwegian coast seems protected from ocean squalls.
The channels separating the islands were formed in the same manner as the Norwegian fjords. The first island in the Lofoten is Østfagøy.
Inspired by this extraordinary setting, numerous painters have come here to practice their art. The inhabitants of Østfagøy, as if to better partake of these glorious landscapes, have made it a habit of painting their homes and boats in bright colors. Man first came to the Lofoten almost 1,000 years ago, forming a community at Kabelvåg, a fishing village which today boasts an art school.
On Østfagøy, one is instantly struck by the island's great diversity.
Influenced by the Gulf Stream, the climate is mild in winter and warmed almost constantly in the summer's midnight sun. But sea winds continuously flay the coastline, and only the most hardy species of trees are able to survive.
The inhabitants have learned to take precautions against the wind, and the roofs of many houses are secured with stones or earth. Is one of the most picturesque villages on the island of Mykonos. The history of the Lofotens is closely linked to that of fishing, because these waters are teeming with fish. Fishermen come from all over Norway to cast their nets off the shores of the Lofotens.
Long ago, fishermen lived 3 months of the year in huts built on pilings and called rorbus. Today they've been modernized and are used by tourists. The number of fish in these waters has diminished greatly in the last 50 years, but fishing continues. Each year, some 4,000 fishing boats still ply these waters, netting up to 50,000 metric tons of cod.
Schools of cod gather here every year to spawn from January to late April. The success of the catch in the Lofotens affects not only Norway's fishing industry, but the country's entire economy. Meanwhile, at Sorvigen, the Norwegians perpetuate traditional crafts. In the south of Mykonos is a little village, population 400, with an extremely odd name, O. This is where the road ends, at the southern limit of the Lofoten barrier.
These idyllic landscapes are found on Europe's most well-known and most frequently visited archipelago, which we usually associate with crowded beaches and coastlines covered with high-rise resorts.
It's true. The Balearic archipelago, particularly Majorca, its largest island, has become a destination that's too heavily sullied by tour operators, and many beaches have become veritable holiday factories. But let's not forget that 3/4 of Majorca's 3,500 square kilometers remain intact, and it seems as if nature has gathered together some of its greatest treasures here, like this area in the north of the island, Cape Formentera, where the mountains literally drop into the sea.
On Majorca, which is haunted by the perfume of oranges, lemons, and almonds, one has an incredible sense of well-being. The variety of the landscapes and their rich and subtle colors give the island incomparable charm.
The Balearic archipelago is the emerged extension of a mountain range on the Iberian Peninsula that was separated from the continent in the early Tertiary era. The movement of the Earth's plate at that time caused part of the mountain range to collapse. There's now an underwater abyss some 1,500 meters in depth between the Balearic Islands and Spain. Majorca, often called the Island of Trees, is composed of two regions of limestone mountains between which lies a trough of red earth. Here, one feels as if one were in the mountains.
Given the heavy urbanization in past years, one wonders what will become of these peaceful inlets. But the Majorcans have become aware of the need to preserve their natural heritage, and since 1983, measures have been taken to protect the environment. Many parts of the island have been classified as nature reserves.
Unlike its larger neighbor, the little island of Menorca and its 285 kilometers of coastline have remained untouched by the huge boom in island tourism. The cliffs at Cap Cavalleria may remind one of those at Formentera, but one mustn't forget this island is very different from Majorca.
Here, the average altitude is less than 100 meters. Menorca is a limestone plateau dotted with schist hills. One might think that the rather austere landscape would inspire melancholy, but the population is particularly hospitable, and the island has managed to preserve its authentic character better than its larger neighbor.
Long ago, Majorca and Menorca were called the two gymnases. The Balearic Islands are often linked with another pair of islands located to the west, the Patrices.
The islands are located farther off the coast than the gymnases and faced more directly west. One of them is called Ibiza and has a city with the same name. The island's circumference is 400 stadia, and its width is more or less equivalent to its length.
The island the Greek writer Strabo called Ibiza is Ibiza the Catalan, in other words, Ibiza, one of the most beautiful islands in all of the Mediterranean. This city of Ibiza clings to a rocky hilltop above a magnificent harbor. The upper city, Dalt Vila, is dominated by a cathedral and surrounded by 16th century ramparts built over ruins of walls built by the Arabs around an ancient Carthaginian city.
The city eventually spilled out of its enclosure and spread beyond the ramparts to the foothills in a picturesque maze of narrow streets and stairways. This is Sapenia, the old fishing district.
Ibiza has 210 kilometers of coastline, washed by crystal clear water. The island is only 41 kilometers wide at its largest point, so one never goes far without stumbling onto the sea.
The rocky coast is rugged and sprinkled with reefs. Its multitude of inlets have a particular charm. Most of these inlets are only accessible by boat, and since there is no road around the island, Ibiza is still able to preserve its many wonders from the dangers of intensive tourism.
One can occasionally see cabins at the foot of the rocks, oddly laid out in straight lines. Long ago, fishermen left their boats here. Today there's less fishing, not surprising in these shallow waters where fish are increasingly rare. And with the pollution of the Mediterranean, the catch is so modest that it's hardly enough to meet the island's needs in the off-season.
Ibiza, despite its dry climate, is covered with beautiful vegetation thanks to its large underground water network and rather fertile soil. Almonds are harvested here. Lemons and olives are cultivated.
The inhabitants of Ibiza are, by tradition, either farmers or sailors. But at one time, in the Middle Ages, farming was abandoned as the population went in search of the white gold of the salt marshes in the south of the island. These salt marshes have been known since the time of the Phoenicians. Today, Ibiza salt is shipped to Nordic countries and to the Far East.
At this spot, right near the coast, there is a bare, rocky, spectacular little island. Isla Esvedra rises above the sea to an altitude of 380 meters. Nearby is another small island, this one inhabited, although only by a handful of wild goats. Isla Esvedra, where falcons were bred in the 13th century, is legendary. It is said that the Carthaginian general Hannibal was born on this austere peak. Actually, it's more likely that he was born in Carthage.
One board ship for the smallest of the Paitwises, Formentera, just 4 kilometers away. The sound is only several dozen meters deep at this spot. Formentera is an island with an odd shape. From the air, it looks like a hammer. In fact, it's formed by two islands linked by a strip of land. The northern part is flat, whereas the southern part is mountainous. Today, Formentera is still the least frequently visited island in the archipelago. Its magnificent landscapes are almost pristine, like they were in the days the island was a pirate's haven. It's even said there's a pirate treasure buried in the grottos in the island's slopes.
The name Formentera comes from the Latin frumentaria, in other words, the island of grain. Grapes are also cultivated here. The islanders raise sheep and goats. The land is arid and further dried by the northern wind. To protect themselves from it as best they can, the islanders built stone walls.
Salt is no longer extracted from the marshes of Formentera, but the island happily retains its wild charm and traditions. Formentera has the highest life expectancy in all of Spain.
"Will we never find the Earth's last survivor?" cried Captain Servadac. "My friend Zuf, have a look," said little Nina suddenly. And saying this, she showed Ben Zuf the pigeon she was carefully holding in her hands. On the bird's left wing, one could very clearly see the mark of an ink stamp, and inscribed on the stamp was the only word that mattered: Formentera.
Jules Verne, a master of the imaginary, speaks of islands yet again. This is because these often close lands, better protected from the influences of man and more exposed to the elements, bring us closer to nature, thereby enriching our dreams.